So shortly after, the followers of Hamashiach, is the Messiah in Hebrew, but shortly after the followers of the Messiah were unalived, and shortly after 70 AD, so just for the benefit of those who may not know what happened in 70 AD, Rome conquered Jerusalem, and they destroyed the temple of the Most High. They destroyed it to the point that they even dug up the foundation stones thereof. In other words, they tried to make it seem as though the Most High's temple was no longer there. They tried to erase the Most High, erase the evidence of the Most High. This is how devious and wicked these people are. And let me tell you, family, the Most High has not forgotten that, because there is a promised retribution, payback, as you will, of the Most High, and he calls it the vengeance of my temple, or the vengeance of his temple. So this is a judgment that has to come. But all that aside, after 70 AD, the followers of Rome destroyed the Most High's temple. But there was a few leftover Israelite communities in Jerusalem, in the Promised Land. And from time to time, this is one of those things where when you had a direct connection to the Most High, we knew we were special. We knew we were special. And unfortunately, this led to rebellion. So whenever Rome tried to keep Israel under its thumb, Israel would keep, raising up, keep rebelling, and fights would occur, rebellions would occur, and Rome finally had enough. So around, in the 100s ADs, Roman emperor by the name of Emperor Hadrian finally had enough of all this rebellious people. And he did a couple of things. One is he said, all you Israelites, get out. From this point on, you are no longer welcome in your own land. In fact, he went as far as to make it illegal for Israel to even look upon Jerusalem. They couldn't even look at it, family. Think about that. Think about how devastating that was for the children of Israel, who by law had to go to Jerusalem for their feast days. By law had to go to the priests for some of their sacrifices. So Rome was not only expelling them, but they were cutting them off from their Elohim. So this happened in, like I said, the early 100s ADs. And then as part of this excommunication of Israel from the land, we then see a series of events that impacts Israel to this day. And actually, it impacts the Christian church to this day as well. And it's funny because this is the same stuff that you can find in seminary schools, but they won't tell you about it. And I remember, I've had family members that have been in seminary schools and have asked them about this. It's like, well, when you were in your studies for seminary school, did they go over the Inquisition? Did they talk about the Crusades? And the answer was, short answer was no. Like, this was something that the history is well known, but they don't teach what they did during that time, which is unfortunate because by doing so, this leaves off important pieces of information for us to understand why certain things occur or why we do certain things today. For example, so when Emperor Hadrian had expelled the Israelites or kept them from going to Jerusalem, cut them off from making their sacrifices, what also occurred then, we see a couple of things that occurred. One was around this time was the very first time that the lead bishop in Israel, the head guy over the church, up to that point was a hereditary Israelite. In other words, what I tell people is that Israel was led by Israel. I'm going to say the early church, what people would say the early church or the assembly, was always led by Israelites, always up to that point. But once they were expelled, once they were banned from coming to Jerusalem, for the very first time, we see a Gentile bishop being placed over the assembly by Rome. This is what I call the Roman takeover of the church. This is very important information because if you know about the institution, the empire of Rome in the scriptures, Rome is always associated, unfortunately, with the devil. Rome is associated with the nation that Hamashiach, the Messiah himself, will destroy when he comes back. If you consider the prophecy of Daniel with the statue, right? With the statue and the feet, the iron of the legs of iron, and then the feet of mixed with iron and clay. Remember, iron represents Rome. The feet represents divided Rome. And then it talked about how a stone uncut would come in and destroy the feet, thereby destroying the statue. In other words, Hamashiach, who was represented by the stone, will come and smash Rome to pieces. Rome will be the enemy of Hamashiach when he returns. And then yet here we have Rome taking over the church, expelling the Israelites from the land, and putting the very first bishop over the church in 100s AD. So when this happens, we also see something else take place for the very first time, captured in documentation. You can actually pull up your favorite AI tool and type in AI, say, ask AI, when was the very first written occurrence of the word spiritual Israel? In other words, when was the very first written time that we find someone talking about promoting spiritual Israel? It's right after Rome took over the church is when you started seeing this, this notion of, hey, wait a minute. Well, we're Israel too. We're the Most High's people too. After they took it over, after they kicked out the children of Israel. So this is what kind of led to everything else that occurs after that. Of course, we know about Emperor Constantine in the 300s ADs. This is when, he's also over the church, so to speak. And we start to see things like the day of worship or the day of rest. The Sabbath had changed from what folks will call Saturday to Sunday. And we also start to see, certain holidays and feast days done away with, and the rise of these pagan days start to be institutionalized in the church. All this happened after that, family. And in addition to this hostile takeover, and the reason why I call it a hostile takeover was because this also was associated with violence in the church, violence against none other than the children of Israel. And this is why I was talking to you before about the Inquisition, the Crusades, and then the time actually before all that, Israel was still being persecuted and prosecuted and chased down, hunted down by the church. This is the history that they don't talk about. And what's also not talked about is the reason why they persecuted and pursued the children of Israel. It was because of the law. It was because of the law. Now, have you ever heard, you probably heard the term growing up as a kid. Maybe you were sitting down at the kitchen table with your grandmother or your father, and they was trying to relay the message of sacrifice, like the sacrifices that they did in order to get to that point where you were sitting at the table, the sacrifices that they went through in order to buy the house that you're living in, the sacrifices that they went to or through in order to get you to the school that you were attending at the time, or the sacrifices that they did in order to buy you a car. Just think about anything that you were sitting down and your parents or someone who cared about you sat there and reminded you about the sacrifices that they went through in order to get you something, right? And this is one of the things that comes to mind when I am thinking about the law, statutes, and commandments. Now, what I'm going to do, family, just bear with me just for a second. I'm going to swap screens right quick. I'm just going to share a screen and just see if I can bring up my PowerPoint slide. I probably should have brought it up a long time ago, but let me see if I can pull it up here. Hang on, family. All right, here we go. So hopefully you can see that. I'm going to move my screen around here. All right. So hopefully you can see that. Hopefully that shows up on your screen. So sacrifice, the cost of the law. Now, like I said, you've probably heard YouTube, or what you probably watch YouTube videos, YouTube discussions I think the most recent one was the Dxxth show. And, you know, it's not the only one, family, and we've gone through these same conversations at the kitchen table, you know, whether we're talking with family and friends, at work, that sort of thing. And the thing is, family, is that, like I said earlier, the conversation about the law, it's great that we're making it a philosophical discussion. You know, we're making it a discussion with the scriptures. We're bringing out this, and they're going to Ephesians, they're bringing out Galatians. You know, like I said before, usually when the pattern is, you know, our Christian brothers and sisters will usually go to those chapters in books, and they will go to the earlier chapters, whereas the Israelites, we will acknowledge those earlier chapters in the book, but we'll point them to the later chapters, which are kind of like summation chapters. Like, this is the whole key of the matter, right? The whole point of the matter. You can find it in the, like, you know, Galatians 5. Instead of looking at Galatians 2 and 3, keep reading all the way to Galatians 5 when it turns you back to the law, statutes, and commandments. Or if you're going to talk about how the law was being placed on your heart, written on your heart, then go the next step and say, well, what happens when the law is written on your heart? Doesn't that mean that you will then be performing the law? Well, like I said, that's just a story for another day. But like I said, in addition to that, in addition to all that, which is great, which is great, fam, it's great to have the discussion. There is a key piece of information that is left out, and that is the sacrifice of the law, the cost of the law in history that your forefathers went through. And this is the point of this message, fam. This is the point of this video. Just want to share some different, you know, pieces of information. Again, this is information that is in seminary schools. Your pastor probably knows about all this stuff, but they won't tell you about it. Hallelujah. Oh, and just a quick shout out to everyone that's in the chat. Big peace and blessings to Ema's sister Saul. Peace and blessings to you, my sister. Peace and blessings to everyone that's in the chat. Hopefully everybody's doing well. All right, so the sacrifice of law. Now, it's also important to know that it was prophesied from the very beginning that the attacks against Israel would come to those who were trying to keep the law. This is that Revelations 12, verse 17. And actually, I'm going to switch screens here. And yeah, let me switch screens. I know I just brought up the PowerPoint slide, but actually, let me pull up I also have a Revelations 10 in my web browser. So I'm going to pull up Revelations 10, just so that we can see that real quick. I'm sorry, Revelations 12. And so, of course, Revelations 12, it talks about the dragon. And so we know about that dragon is none other than Satan himself, than the devil. And you can see it here. It says, we'll just read a little bit of the first part of Revelations 12 and then jump down to the bottom where it says, and there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and under her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried and travaileth in birth, and pain to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven. So the woman represents Israel, just so that you know. But then it's going to talk about something else that's in heaven. Verse 3, it says, and then there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. Now, a crown is a kingdom. Verse 4 says, and his head drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them down to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered. In other words, the woman was getting ready to be birthed or give birth. And we know that birthing was the Messiah, right? And we know in history what happened when the woman was getting, or when the world was getting ready to give birth to the Messiah. But let's keep reading. It says, verse 4 again, it says, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, this lines up with the history that we know. When the Messiah was born, you had King Herod trying to unalive all the Israelite children that were 2 years old and younger. It was a great massacre that took place. So in reality, we know who it was, King Herod, part of Rome. But over in Revelations, which is giving us the symbolic representation of that event, it's calling Rome the red dragon. It's calling Rome the red dragon. Rome's colors are red. The color of the dragon in Revelations 12 is red. And this is part of the reason how we can bring these two together and say that, you know, the red dragon is Rome, which is also called the devil. Of course, just like the Most High uses different nations and people, so does the red dragon, so does the devil. I remember, even from the very beginning, it was prophesied when it talked about Eve and how her seed would bruise the head of the serpent, and how the serpent would bite the heel of Eve's children. So in other words, it talked about two actual physical seeds that will be upon the earth. These weren't metaphorical seeds. Eve had literal seeds upon the earth. We are descendant, well, most of us, from Eve. We are descendant from Adam, right? From that seed. But then there is what people don't also know is that Hasatan has a physical seed upon this earth. Whether you believe them or not, whether you accept them or not, they are here, family, warring against the children of Israel, warring against the seed of Adam, of Eve. In any case, so here, just wanted to read these few scriptures to you just to show how this symbolically links or points to Rome being associated with the devil, Rome being associated with the red dragon, which is important because if we jump all the way to the bottom, and then it talks about that red dragon again and his relationship to this woman. And then it talks about verse 17, it says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman. In other words, he was very upset with the woman. And in the end times, it tells you, and it says, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So these offspring of the woman who is Israel. So the red dragon is going to specifically go and make war against the remnant of Israel, the seed of Israel. Now, it's not just any seed of Israel. It's not just all of the seed of Israel. And it says in verse 17, it says, which keep the commandments of YAH and the testimony of Yahushua HaMashiach, and the testimony of what you see Jesus Christ. I say Yahushua HaMashiach. Yahushua is, of course, one of the name in Hebrew. Of course, there's different pronunciations for it. HaMashiach is the Messiah. So you can see it here, family, that it was always prophesied that the dragon would go after Israel's seed in the last days. The red dragon, the devil himself, would go after Israel simply because they were trying to keep the commandments of the Most High. And they had the testimony of Hamashiach. So it was always there from the very beginning. So in other words, family, we shouldn't be surprised when we look at what Rome did. So like I said, Rome took over the church around the 100s. Emperor Hadrian kicked out and expelled the Israelites, put in his bishop, his bishop became the head ruler over the church. Very first time you had a Gentile in the whole span of the Bible, the very first time. This is outside of the bounds of the pages of the Bible, but they put their God, the Gentile, over the church. They expelled Israel. They banned Israel from even coming to Jerusalem. And then once they did that, family, they started persecuting the children of Israel. This is what the whole Inquisition, the Crusades, all that stuff. This is when all that stuff happens. Israel is literally chased around the world. They're sent into captivity. In fact, the captivity of Israel was prophesied by none other than Hamashiach himself. We can find this in Luke 21, and hopefully you can see it on the screen. And it says, Luke 21, and let's start at verse, let's start at verse 13. And it says, and it shall turn to you for testimony. Settle it therefore in your heart, not to meditate before what you shall answer. For I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which all your adversaries shall not be able to gainsay nor resist. And you shall be betrayed both by parents and brethren. This is speaking about the end times. And it says kinsfolks and friends. And some of you shall they cause to be put to death. Think about that, family. They will give up the ghost for this truth. And it says, verse 17, and it says, and you shall be hated of all men, not some, of all men for my name's sake. But there shall not an hair of your head perish, and your patience possess you your souls. And when you shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. This happened in 70 AD. In 70 AD, when we look at the accounts of the fall of Jerusalem, what, it depends on, how familiar you are with how Israel fell. During this time is, Rome, of course, Titus, General Titus. First it was Vespasian, and then Vespasian had to go back to Rome. So he left the conquest of Jerusalem up to his son, General Titus. And General Titus, when he came up against Jerusalem, Jerusalem was ripe for the picking. And the reason why I said that is because in Jerusalem, there were strifes going on in Jerusalem. There were 3 factions that were warring, that were fighting, literally fighting inside the walls of Jerusalem at the time when General Titus presented his army on the ridge on Passover. By the way, again, these major events occur on what we call Moedim, feast days. These are what we would call the appointed times. So when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, this occurred around Passover. And then, or at least when the army was presented, it was presented on Passover. So General Titus shows up, Israel's warring with each other inside. And then at some point during the battle, what the Romans decide to do is that they decide to build a moat to encompass Jerusalem with a 5-mile wide wall. So of course they dig the ditch, which then they built up the walls, and their soldiers, they were talking about how remarkably fast that they built that thing. It took them no time. With all, just think about it. They had at how many Roman soldiers that they have had to have in order to build that wall in record time. So the wall went up. Now this is called a siege. Now you heard about what's going on over in Iran, right? Iran. And so over in Iran, you have the U.S. doing what Rome does. They built a blockade around Iran, trying to keep things from going in and out, right? That comes from history. That comes from Rome. That's a tactic of Rome. So, or at least a tactic that Rome used. I'm not sure if they're the ones that created it, but they used it here. So in other words, they came against Rome. They created this wall around Rome, tried to cut off supplies. Now, normally Jerusalem would be okay. And the reason why they would be okay is because they had provisions in the city that for months that would last, that would keep the occupants, provided with supplies for months. They wouldn't go hungry. They wouldn't go thirsty. They had an underground water supply. They were good, family. But what happened was that when these factions started fighting each other, these factions did the unthinkable. They destroyed their own supplies. They destroyed their own food rations in an attempt to starve the other faction out, not knowing that really that they were sealing the fate of their own demise by doing that. Because by the time the Romans came, their supplies were pretty much gone. They burned it up. They destroyed it. So this is what made that blockade, that 5-mile radius, circle around Jerusalem, so effective. This is why you heard stories or read stories about cannibalism and all this other stuff. And of course, when this happened, eventually Israel fell. And when they say, they kind of divide the destruction in Israel into 3 groups. One group was destroyed by fire. One group, like 1/3 was destroyed by fire. 1/3 was destroyed by one third was destroyed by fire. 1/3 was destroyed by the sword. And then they said the other 1/3, they were the ones that escaped. And this is what I tell people. It's like, you are literally descendant from those who escaped Jerusalem. Well, how can you say that, Brother Benign? Well, part of the of course, if you've been on this channel for a while, I always tell people about the Israelites of Spain and Portugal, and about how they themselves say that they are descendants of the descendants of King David. But one of the things I really haven't hit on too much, and that is they also say that are refer to themselves as the Israelites of Jerusalem. In other words, they were there. They were there when Jerusalem fell. They were there when the walls were breached, and some of them were there when the temple was burned. And so therefore, of course, what I do is that I tie our history to the Israelites in Spain and Portugal. So therefore, you are literally descendant from those who had their feet on the ground in Jerusalem when it fell. You were there, family. You were there. Your forefathers were there. And this is what Hamashiach prophesied. And we can see that his prophecy was so on point that as we read this, you'll see that this mirrors your life, your history. Now, let's keep going. It says, verse 21, and it says, then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. It says, and let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto, for these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, to them that give suck in those days, for there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people, and they shall fall by the edge of the sword. That's one. And it says, and shall be led away captive into all nations, and Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up too is because also in recent conversations, the question was, well, when did y'all go into captivity? How is the transatlantic slave trade a fulfilling of prophecy? Well, the transatlantic slave trade is the only fulfillment of this particular prophecy given by none other than the Messiah himself. Because again, he says, shall be led away captive or into slavery into all nations. There is only one people on the planet Earth that have gone into slavery into all nations. This is why scriptures like this or prophecies like this point to none other than what folks would call the Negroes, or the people that were part of the transatlantic slave trade, the diaspora. There's no other body, no person on planet Earth or group that even comes close to that. So this is just, like I said, just one of those things where Hamashiach himself, and this is after the Babylonian captivity, after the Assyrian captivity, he's prophesying another captivity, right? And then, of course, we have the fall of Jerusalem, which then spirals into cascading events. All right. So you can see it there, family. And then also just want to share with you as well that the Most High he's promised for those that escape, he's going to refine us. In other words, as we're going through persecution after persecution, prosecution after prosecution, family, it's not going to be easy. But as we go through that process, family, we are going to be remolded and shaped into what the Most High wants us to be shaped in. For example, this is Zechariah chapter 13, and let's read verse 7. It says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd. That's the sword against the Messiah. And against the man that is my fellow, saith Yahuwah of hosts, smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered. And that's what happened when Hamashiach was crucified. Israel was persecuted and scattered. Isn't that what the Messiah said? He says, you will be scattered to the four corners of the earth. You will be scattered or sent into captivity into all nations. He had prophesied that. This is just another representation of that. It says, my sheep shall be scattered, and I will return, says, I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, says Yahuwah, two parts therein shall be cut off and died. Now, remember, I told you that there were three parts in Jerusalem when it fell. One were destroyed by fire, one were destroyed by the sword, and the other, they were the ones that went into captivity. They were the ones that escaped. But unfortunately, they escaped only to be led away captive into all nations, like Hamashiach said. So it says, verse 7. Let's finish reading verse 7. It says, just start at verse 7 again. It says, awake, O sword, against my shepherd, and against the man that is my fellow, says Yahuwah of hosts, smite the shepherd, and the sheep shall be scattered, and I will turn mine hand upon the little ones. And it shall come to pass that in all the land, says Yahuwah, 2 parts therein shall be cut off and die, but the third, that third part, Israel, the third part shall be left therein. Verse 9. And I will bring the third part through the fire, and will refine them as silver is refined, and will try them as gold is tried. They shall call on my name, and I will hear them. I will say, it is my people. And they shall say, Yahuwah is my Elohim. Hallelujah. So in other words, family, there's going to be some trying times after the fall of Jerusalem, when Israel was scattered and sent to the 4 corners of the earth. It was prophesied to be some trying times. And of course, you can imagine, as gold is being tried, as silver is being refined, you can imagine from the perspective of the gold and the silver, that's not a pleasant experience, because they're being burned, they're being molded, they're being shaped, they're being hammered from all sides, right? And that molding, shaping process is, can be a painful, very painful experience. So here you are, family. And this painful experience brings me back to the sacrifice, the cost of the law. Like I said, when we talk about the law, most people don't know what happened, the history about the cost of people being lawless today, the cost of the doctrine of lawlessness today, the cost that our forefathers had to pay. So it says, why they refused? The laws were not optional. So as Israel scattered across the nations and the Roman Empire chased them down wherever they were almost always presented with this option. They said, you can either accept Christianity, the Roman Catholicism, or you can be put to death. They were almost always given those 2 options. And what you're going to see in these PowerPoint slides, family, is that over and over again, Israel chose the latter. In other words, they chose not to abandon the law, statutes, and commandments. They chose to give up their lives in a lot of cases. And you can see it here on the screen. It says the law was their identity. The law, statutes, and commandments of Yah were not religion. They were the Israelites' covenant identity passed down from their fathers. To abandon them, it says to abandon them was to abandon who they were. The choice they faced. Empire after empire gave the same ultimatum: convert, renounce the laws, accept the God of your oppressors. I'm sorry, I stuttered on that. I need to say that again. Renounce the laws, accept the God of your oppressors, and live, or keep the commandments and die. They chose death. What they gave up. Now, in cases, what we're going to read about is what they gave up. They were willing to give up houses. They were willing to give up land, gold, vineyards, businesses, entire generational wealth accumulated over centuries. They left riches and arrived as beggars or paupers. And it says they did not care. And it says even their children, when the empire saw that the parents were obstinate, that no matter what, that they would not break, that they would not come off these laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High, it says they targeted the children. It was a wicked, calculated strategy. Oh, if we can't get the parents, well, let's get them while they're young. This is one of those things where I talked about the transatlantic slave trade. When you look at the transatlantic slave trade, when you watch these movies, the portrayal of those that were on the slave ships, there is a great injustice that's done even in the portrayal of the slaves themselves. Because in most of those movies, if you remember, most of the slaves on the transatlantic slave ships, they were older men. They were men probably in their 30s or 40s or something like that. They were older people. But the truth of the matter is that the makeup of the people that were on the slave ships would look more like those people, the same people that you would see on a middle school bus or elementary school bus. They were children. And the reason how we know this is that there's a website called slavevoyages.org. Slavevoyages.org, what they do, family, is that they went around and they collected all the data that they could about actual slaves that were on slave ships, and they were able to capture their name and their ages and where they were from. And they will even allow you to download this information, which is what I did. You can download it into an Excel spreadsheet. And then you can sort it. Of course, what I did was that I sorted it by age. And then I did that mathematical equation and computation, right, to discover that like 95% of the children that were in those records, of the people that were in those records, were between the ages of like 25 and younger. They were young people, family. They were going after the children. This was strategic. Remember, your condition is very unique compared to everybody else's condition that went into slavery. Your condition, family, is that you don't have your history. Your condition is that past the transatlantic slave trade, you don't know who you are. It's almost like, I believe I saw a clip of Malcolm X talking about, how is it that you don't know your history? Remember, that is a very specific condition that you have. If someone goes into history, if they pluck someone up from Africa and then they dump them over in the South, over in the cotton fields of South Carolina, he's still going to know where he's from. And he's going to tell his son where he's from. And that son's going to tell his son where he's from. They're not going to lose their history. But in order to get a person to manufacture a whole people to be void of their history, you have to separate them from those who know their history. In other words, you have to separate them from their parents. This is your special condition that sets so-called African Americans and others apart from everybody else that claims slavery. Because we know there are some groups out there that'll say, well, just like some Ashkenazi, they'll say, well, we went into slavery as well. Did you not know what happened in the Holocaust? Well, part of that, Deuteronomy talks about, us losing our history, knowing who we were, who we are. So, and they themselves disqualified themselves by saying, well, we never forgot who we were. Well, then you can't be the people. Because the people of the book were separated. The people of the book were cut off from their history. With Psalms where, talks about how, let's have it so that the name of Israel will be no more remembered. Like that happened. That was the devious counsel, the wicked counsel against Israel to cut them off from being a nation. In any case, family, you can see it on the screen. It says, and the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of Yah and have the testimony of Yahushua. We read that earlier. So we're going to talk about the ancient sacrifice that occurred. The first recorded act of Israelite martyrdom for the laws of Yah. Now, I'll have to admit now, because of course I use AI to help put this together. So I can't confirm that this is the very first written record. And this is talking about BC, right? Not 80, BC. And this is the ones that the account that you saw in Maccabees. If you're not familiar with Maccabees, in Maccabees, as you can see here, it says Hannah chose death for all her sons, rather than allow them to eat swine before a king. She was the first, but not the last. Now, just to recap what happened in 2 Maccabees chapter 7. In this case, we have emperor. The emperor came to Israel and he wanted to force them to eat swine. Think about that, family. All she had to do was to eat a little pig, eat some pig's feet. That's all she had to do, family. Or you see Antiochus Epiphanes. That's what it was. Antiochus Epiphanes commanded all Israelites to publicly eat swine. This was against their law, statutes, and commandments, the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. I'm sorry, I said their law is the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. It was his laws. And it says it was a direct violation of the dietary laws of YAH. It says this was not merely about food. It was an ultimatum. Renounce your laws or die. You don't have to keep the law. Those laws were done away with. I'm sure they would have loved to have heard that back then. But here they are putting their lives on the line. Remember that saying, it's like, you don't realize the sacrifice that was made in order for you to be lawless. And it says, a mother watched each of her 7 sons brought before the king. Each was offered life in exchange for 1 mouthful of swine. All they had to do was eat some pig's feet, family. Right? And it says, or some pork chops. It says each refused. Each was tortured, executed before her eyes. So in other words, it wasn't a quick ordeal, family. They would torture him, rip bone, flesh, burn, maim. And then they come back and say, okay, you ready to eat some swine now? All you got to do is just eat it. It's just me and you. Most High ain't gonna see it. And you're talking about kids, family. These were kids. These weren't grown adults that were used to being tortured. These weren't grown adults that were used to enduring pain. These were kids, family. And this is why I tell you, family, you don't know that Israel back then, Israel was built different. Israel was built different from the kids all the way up to the parents. And I'm sure the kids just, the kids learn from the parents how to be obstinate when it comes to throwing the Most High's laws away. They knew that obedience was key. But they were torturing kids, 7 kids, and these 7 kids still hung on to the law, statutes, and commandments. It says the mother did not beg them to save themselves, but she whispered to each son, says, remember, it was not I who gave you the breath of life. It was the Creator, and to him you would return. Can you imagine telling a kid that he has to give up the ghost? He has all of his life ahead of him. He probably had less than 10 years on the planet Earth. And it's already his mother's telling him he's going to have to go back into the womb. Can you imagine? I mean, you could see that with someone that's older, that's lived his life, somebody that's been a grandfather, that has experienced marriage, that has experienced the joy of being married and having family and things and possessions and going places and seeing things. But to not even see it, to be in the early stages of life, to not even have gone to certain schools or to even have loved in that manner, and to be asked to give it up for some food? Come on, family. I'm just trying to put this thing into perspective, family. You don't realize the sacrifices that your forefathers went through. It says she herself died last, having never wavered. Her sons' defiant cries as they died, and her refusal to watch them abandon Yah's laws became the first great act of the Israelite martyrdom on record. 7 sons, all executed. Mother's life, she died last. Every instinct for self-preservation abandoned. They gave up the ghost for the law, statutes, and commandments. Now, if we go forward we're going to skip across a great deal of history just by going to the Crusades, because the Crusades is like, when you hear me talk about Spain and Portugal, the history of Spain and Portugal, the Crusades are happening at the same time. Actually, the Crusades kick off a little bit before then, but over in Spain and Portugal, in Spain and Portugal, of course, about 711 AD, General Tariq conquers and the other Muslims, and as well as the Israelites. They go into Spain and Portugal. They conquer the land. That land, the combined land, is referred to as the Iberian Peninsula. And from 711 AD, they rule that territory. The the Arabs or the Muslims at the time, what they did was that they gave territory to the Israelites as well. One of the towns that they gave Israel was Granada. Granada, Spain was also called Jews' town. The Arabs, they literally handed that town to the Jews. They say, hey, all right, this y'all town. Manage it as you please, but y'all just kind of give us some money. But this is y'all town. This is yours. And oddly enough, if you were to take a test with My True Ancestry or upload your DNA to My True Ancestry, in the way that their DNA company works is that they take DNA from archaeological sites all around the world, and then they allow you to test your DNA against the bones that they dug up from these old sites all around the world. And there was a site in Granada, Spain, which was the town called Jews Town. And what Black folks are realizing is that they're getting this strange hit, this strange match to some bones that were placed in the dirt in the ground in Jews Town, and they don't know why. Of course, My True Ancestry doesn't call it Jews Town. Now, whether it be through neglect, negligence, or just trying to not tell folks the truth, but at the very least, they're showing you that you have a match, right? You have a match there. And peace and blessings. Thank you for your super chat. Oh, brilliant scholar. Thank you, my brother, for your super chat. And thank you, Ivana, for your super chat as well. Thank you. Much appreciated. In any case, family, so let me pull this up. All right. Hang on. All right. So like I was saying, family, we're going to talk about the Crusades here in a little bit. But we are skipping a lot of history to come up to the Crusades, because that history, like I was saying, from that 100s AD all the way up to 1000 AD, there's a lot of history that occurred there. And like I was telling you before about that 711 AD, about how your DNA matches over in Granada, Spain, and also, and that's what ties, that's another thing that ties you to that region as well. But in any case, I've talked about the history over in Spain and Portugal. Of course, we go over there, and then our forefathers go over there, and then of course the Christian kingdoms began to retake. They call it the Reconquista. They began to retake Spain and Portugal from the Muslims, from the Israelites. And as they do that, they get all the way down to Granada. Granada is actually where they handed the keys over. They actually handed the keys over to the Christians over in Jews Town. Think about that, family. They did it over in Jews Town. And that was in 1492. Now, and of course, we talked about how the Israelites were pushed from there over into West, North Africa and Morocco. They actually went to other places as well. But then this is when we have that great influx of Israelites over into Africa. But at the same time, the Crusades were occurring, because what occurred with the Crusades, family, was that think about it. You have Spain and Portugal, this history that we've been focusing on. But now what we're going to do for the very first time is that we're now going to shift to the east of Spain and Portugal. And to the east of Spain and Portugal is this kingdom. You've probably heard about it, the Holy Roman Empire. Arguably the most important empire at the time, and even to this day, because I think America is a vestige of the Holy Roman Empire. And what we find is that it started roughly, of course, when the Muslims go into Spain and Portugal in 711 AD. In the 800s AD is when we start to see the Holy Roman Empire take shape. Now, they were composed of, let me see if I think I have a slide in here or two. Hopefully I put the slide in here. Let me see. Yes. This is the slide. Now, the Holy Roman Empire was composed of different sects and people. And what really constituted the Holy Roman Empire was Germany, what folks would call present day Germany. Of course, back then it wasn't called Germany. It was it was ruled over by these people called the Franks. And hang on, I want to widen my screen so I can see it better as well. But there was this people called the Franks that moved into that territory. According to the history of the Franks, the oral traditions, excuse me, of the Franks themselves, they tell you that in their history, they came from the east, from that territory of the Khazars. That's what they say. But of course, you have modern day scholars who say, oh, well, that probably didn't happen, even though the Franks themselves, they're saying where they came from. But modern day scholars, because they don't like the Khazarian hypothesis, they're pushing against that, trying to claim that they don't know their own history. But here they sit thousands of years later trying to tell them what happened, or over 1,000 years later. That's ridiculous, fam. In any case, the Holy Roman Empire is being born with the Pope, with the Crusades. This is occurring all while Israel was over in Spain and Portugal, living their best life. You know, Israel's over in Spain and Portugal. At least for a time, they were living their best life because they were able to rule themselves. They didn't have people, you know, at the time when they were with the Muslims left them alone for the most part. And with Israel all around the world being persecuted and prosecuted, they heard of a place in Spain and Portugal where they can go and not be persecuted. Oh man, they came over, they flooded over there in great numbers. And so they came over to Spain and Portugal in great numbers. And this is why people would say that the Israelite population in Spain went from somewhere like, you know, you can like hundreds or thousands of Jews to millions, over a million, well over a million Israelites. I'm sorry, I said Jews, but Israelites, because the Israelites in Spain and Portugal never referred to themselves as like Sephardim or anything like that. They referred to themselves, they called themselves Israelites. They said that they were descendants of the house of King David, some of them from the house of Judah. Like these were the children of Judah. They were also referred to as the Israelites of Jerusalem. In other words, they were there when Jerusalem fell. These are they. These are they that Hamashiach spoke of. These are they when the crowd said, oh, yeah, well, let his blood be upon our head and upon our children's children. They shouldn't have said that. They could have said be upon them, their own head, but why even throw us in there? They shouldn't have said that, family. Because I think that's also what played a part in the brutality of the transatlantic slave trade, is because our forefathers had to open their mouth and say that. But in any case, family, over in the Holy Roman Empire, what you have to realize too, family, is that there were a lot of Israelites over in that territory. People don't realize when you think of Germany and Holland and places like that, you know, in our mind, we think, oh, ain't no black people over there. But what you have to realize is that in the old days, during this time, like the time of the Crusades, oh, there were black folks over there, a lot of them. And unfortunately, the demographics of that area, of that land, changed due to the Roman Catholic Church, due to the Crusades. And here you can see these different places where it says Worms, over 1,000 plus killed. Israelites' families sheltered in the bishop's palace when the Crusaders broke through. Every man, woman, and child chose death over baptism. In other words, as these Crusaders were given their marching orders from the Pope, this is another thing, family. These edicts, these commandments, these, you know, unalivings came directly from the Pope. The Pope said, and I guess I should give you some back history as to why the Crusades occurred. Well, when the Israelites came in and the Moors came into Spain and Portugal, and actually, let me see if I got another slide in here to show that. Hang on, family. I think I got another slide. Oh, I don't have the slide in there. All right. Because what I want to do is just show you the territory of the caliphate. So in other words, the Muslims that took over Spain and Portugal also had portions of North Africa, and they also had Jerusalem. They had Jerusalem and all that territory over there. But then what happened was that there was a Turkic sect that rose up, and then they took over Jerusalem. Now, at first, the caliphate they let the Roman Christians alone. Like they were like, y'all can come here. We're going to leave y'all alone. Y'all can, worship in peace and all this other stuff. But then also what happened was that when the Turks came into power and then they took over Jerusalem, they were brutal. They were persecuting Christians left and right. They were persecuting the Roman Christians left and right. And so this was the catalyst that caused the Pope to say, you know what, we're going to take Jerusalem back. And so he galvanized his troops and he had a call to arms. And his call to arms was, he said, I will give you, and he's talking about the people. Oops, hang on, family. Move my screen around, close the wrong screen. He said, I will give you indulgences. And what these indulgences were, they were, he said, basically, if you go over and unalive those people, he said, I will forgive you of your sins. That's right. The Pope said he would forgive them of their sins if they would go over and retake Jerusalem. And it's like and of course, anything that they did in order to make that happen, their sins would be forgiven. And of course, we know that's blasphemous for the Pope to say that he can forgive sins, but that's a story for another day. But that just goes to show you, family, that just goes to show you that this Pope, that this religion at the time was a wicked, evil religion. So in any case, when the Crusades kicked off, you had these people leaving out of Germany. So again, Germany, think about Germany as the hub, as the headquarters for the Holy Roman Empire. This is where they were based out of. And as they came streaming out of that location, they murdered and they unalived populations along the way. They were like, well, we're not going to wait until we get to Jerusalem to unalive people. We're going to unalive people all the way there. So from city to city to city, they sacked the cities and they unalived people in great numbers. And this is what you see on the screen. I just pulled out some of the numbers from some of those cities. And this is where you see Worms or Mainz, or this is like territories, or Speyer, right? The community was attacked on the Sabbath. Those who had survived chose to take their own lives. The same Speyer recorded in 1340 in the mural. And because maybe you're saying, well, Brother Benai, how do you know that these were dark-skinned people? Well, we know that they were dark-skinned people because in those areas, they were prone to use what's called family crests, right? They had these visual representations of their family. And when we pull those family crests, we can see that in a lot of those family crests, they were family crests of Black people, of dark-skinned, melanated people. And as the Crusaders were ravaging the town on their way to Jerusalem, they gave the Israelites a choice. They said either convert to Christianity, get rid of those laws, statutes, and commandments, or die. And what we see is that the reason why the slaughter was so great was because time after time after time, the Israelites would not come off those laws. Now, let me just answer this question right off the bat in case you may have a question. Well, Brother Benaiah, if they were following the law, statutes, and commandments, how come they were being persecuted? I thought that if they were following the law, statutes, and commandments, that they will be blessed, that they will be protected. That is absolutely correct. But the problem that they were doing is that they were also engaged in paganism. In other words, they weren't just following the law, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. They were following the law, statutes, and commandments of the Talmud as well, which is the same problem that some of our brothers over in Africa, as well as some of our brothers and sisters over here in the States, that they get a hold of that Talmud stuff, man, that's going to put you in a bad place. I'm telling you, you don't want to have no part of that. When we was watching Dr. Daff and we had those young ladies that were, turned Jews, or what I would call Black Jews, since they're going to call us Black Hebrew Israelites, they Black Jews. But anyway, they get involved in that mess. You're going to be outside of the blessings of the Most High. You keep that up. You are. I'm just going to let you know. But that's what happened, family. And this is why I say you got to be careful about who you let into your orbit, because especially, and this is, shout out to our African brothers and sisters, when you're awakening to your truth of who you are, Igbo, whether you're either Igbos or whether you're over in the Limba and stuff like that, and you have an organization, such as the Ashkenaz, and they show up and they said, well, do you want to be ancient Israelites or do you want to be Jews? The answer is you want to be ancient Israelites. Because that's where the truth is. That's where the power is. It's not on the other side. Because to go to the other side, they will have you to renounce the Hamashiach, renounce the Messiah. And then they'll have you to start adhering to the laws, the commandments of man. Not the Most High, but the commandments of man. They're oral traditions. And so when they show up, you need to show them the door, family. I know y'all want to be gracious and everything like that, but you got to show them the door. And in any case, when the Most High says that he's going to take the curses that were upon you and your forefathers and then place your curses on them, the last place you want to be is with them with those curses on them. Like, that's literally why when the Israelites showed up in these different places around the world, why those nations kicked us out was because our forefathers had the curses on them. They had the Black Plague on them. They had the, all this other stuff on them. And then when they showed up and that Black Plague was on them, the Black Plague started getting on the locals. And so the locals was like, whoa, hey, man, I'm sorry. You got to go. Y'all got to go. Y'all bringing all this plague stuff on, all this famine coming, follows you like a dark cloud. I'm sorry. Everything was cool until y'all showed up with that black cloud, that dark cloud. Y'all got to go. And so they kicked us out. This is why we couldn't find any ease where we stayed. So to that effect, the Most High finally takes that dark cloud off of you. It's like, all right, you've served your sentence. I'm now going to take that dark cloud and put it on your enemies. And then he puts it on the enemies. The last thing you want to do is invite the enemy to your camp to bring that dark cloud in. I'm just saying, keep them out and be like, all right, we see you. I see you out there, but you can stay out there. You can stay out there though. Yeah, I can stay out there. Anyway, all right, let's bring it back, fam. All right, so this is what the Israelites gave up. When I talked about remember I talked about sacrifice, when I talked about how it said, you don't realize the sacrifices that we made in order for you to get to this point. The Israelites made sacrifice after sacrifice over hundreds of years. These weren't any small sacrifices, was what I'm telling you, family. These weren't just sacrifices that were made by adults. These were sacrifices that were made by kids, family. Made by kids, family. They gave up whole houses and estates. It says every Israelite household, from the humblest dwelling to the grandest estate, had to be sold and abandoned. And then what they did, family, tell her, like, these folks were dirty. They said, okay, you can sell your house, but the money you got from it, you can't take it with you. You got to leave your money here with me. So they literally had to give it all away unless they could find some way of smuggling it out of the country. Some of them were able to smuggle it, but some of them weren't. They had to give up land and vineyards. You talk about how today some of you all live on a half of an acre, a quarter of an acre, or maybe you're renting an apartment. You don't even have an acre of your own. But back then, that's why I tell you, family, like you probably got acres over in Spain and Portugal. You probably got acreage over in ancient Germany, like all these different places, as well as in Israel. When people talk about reparations, I think your mind is like, you're thinking too small. Of course, we got to also think about the property swap, the wealth swap that occurred during Red Summer and Black Wall Street here in the States, for those of you all that are in the States. But it also should include the taxes, the property that your forefathers held in other countries. When your lineage went through Germany, when your lineage went through Ireland, when your lineage went through Spain and Portugal, when your lineage went through Germany. Yes, some of you all even came by way of Germany, Holland, and all those other places, and your property was taken from you even over there. All that stuff is owed back unto you, family. I just think that you're cutting yourself short when you just say, all right, just give me a little change back for slavery. That's a start, but that's not all of it. I'm just letting you know. But in it says 22 synagogues of Seville destroyed. So, of course, the centers of learning were destroyed as well. All right. And part 3 says, when parents would not break, the empire changed its tactics. If the parents would not yield, take the children. They were obstinate. They were immovable, unbending. The Israelite parents refused every ultimatum. Think about it, family. If you have a people that's willing to give up their lives, to tell their children to give up their lives, what do you think the alternative is for the people that's trying to convert them? And like I said before, they got to get the children. The children are the weak link in their eyes. And it says, obstinate, says the Israelite parents refused every ultimatum. So the Holy Roman Empire changed strategy, target what the parents could not defend, their children. The royal edict, the Alhambra decree. And this is when, this is kind of just reiterating what we were talking about before, as far as the Israelites having to give up their possessions. And this talks about how they accused the Israelites. It says they had means and ways they could subvert and steal faithful Christians. They were just saying that the Israelites were a danger to Christians, to get them to change and follow the laws, statutes, and commandments and stuff like that. And then the sentence was, we order all Jews and Jewish Israelites, in other words, by the end of the month of July, they depart from all of these are said realms, under pain that if they do not perform and comply with this command, they incur the penalty of death and confiscation of all their possessions. Sacrifice. And it says they may enter, sell, and trade, and alienate all their movable and rooted possessions. They do not export gold or silver or coin money. Like I told you before, you can sell it, but you can't take your money with you. Man, these people were dirty. And so here we go. We see in history where the children were taken, and it says the first day of Passover, the feast of freedom, the day the children were seized. They were seized on Passover, family. They were taken. They were snatched on Passover. And it says on March 19th, 1497, the first day of Passover, King Emmanuel I of Portugal issued a decree. All Israelite children between 4 and 14 years of age were to be brought to Lisbon. When parents arrived, they were told the truth. Their children would be seized, forcibly baptized, and given to Catholic families to be raised far from their homes in lawlessness, never to return again. So they came up with this plan to take their children and to give them to somebody else. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the horror that our forefathers went through? Sacrifice, family. And it says some parents, knowing that a life without the laws of YAH, put my mouse here so you can see where I'm reading. Some parents, knowing that a life without the laws of YAH was a fate worse than death, made the most agonizing choice a parent can make. They took the lives of their own children and then themselves, rather than surrender to Rome. Those who refused everything were herded unto Rossio Square, denied food and water for 3 days. Think about it, family. They were like, all you got to do is renounce your laws, statutes, and commandments. That's all you got to do. Come on now. I know you're hungry. I know you're thirsty. Your body can't last for too much longer without food and drink. What you going to do? Are you going to unalive yourself just for some laws? Don't you realize the laws and statutes and commandments were done away with? It says those who still refused had holy water thrown on them and were declared Christians by force. This is the history that they don't teach, they don't teach in church. It's known in seminary schools. I'm telling you, it's in the books in the seminary schools, but they won't teach them. This is what they did. This is how we got to this doctrine of the laws, statutes, and commandments are done away with. We think that it's some sort of philosophical debate. It's not a philosophical debate. It was sacrifice. That's how we got to today, where you have a people saying the laws, statutes, and commandments are done away with. In particular, you have brown-skinned, dark-skinned Israelites saying that the laws and statutes are done away with, not knowing that the only reason why you have this view is because somewhere down the line you were taken from your parents, you were given over to Christian masters and taught a doctrine of lawlessness, which which you regurgitate today. That is the only reason why we're here today. It's the only reason why we have YouTube videos about people talking about, and bringing up scriptures about the law, statutes, and commandments were done away with. It is a position devoid of history. And just to give you an example, the girl who chose the flames, this was one of those cases where when I was doing research, I came across this early on in my research. This was years ago, family. And I saw this, family. I thought that this was one of the most powerful examples of sacrifice for the law, statutes, and commandments that you could make. And this also gave me some insight into what made up the very fiber and being of an Israelite. This was a young lady of 13 years old. 13 years old, family. And it says an Israelite family and a mother were tortured. Let me just set the scene. So this is at an auto de fe. An auto de fe is called an act of faith. And this is at the height of the Inquisition. The Inquisition was an institution that went out and persecuted and found out Israelites that were, they were declaring that they were Christians, but they were still secretly trying to adhere and hold on to the law, statutes, and commandments, but they were still trying to observe the Most High's feast days. So the Inquisition was that institution that would go out. They were kind of like the ICE today. Like for those of you all that are in the US, how you have those ICE raids. Yeah, the Inquisition they were worse than ICE raids. They would show up, grab people off the streets. And then just like how they were talking about how in ICE, they would put them into these concentration camps, these camps that were just demoralizing, right? They were just horrible. Same thing. They would take these children, they would take these adults, and then they would take them into the catacombs. Usually the catacombs were literally underneath the sanctuary of the church. They were underneath the sanctuary of the church, and underneath there, they would torture them. They would even GRAPE them. I put that G in front there for a reason. But they were GRAPE people underneath the sanctuary, underneath the floorboards of the church. I'm not making this up. These are in old books. These are in those old books that you can find in seminary schools. These are in old books that you can find at archive.org. When I was doing my research, I was reading through all this stuff. I was like, man, I had no idea that all this stuff was going on. No idea. They had people strapped down. They had put oil on their feet, and then they would set their feet on fire. All for the law, statutes, and commandments. It's like, hey, man, you can be free. You don't have to burn. You don't have to get burned alive if you come off the law, statutes, and commandments. Just admit that that the Pope is your replacement for Christ. Just follow the Virgin Mary. That's all you got to do, bro. Just do that thing. And they would be obstinate. No. So they go ahead and light the feet on fire. Imagine the agony. They had contraptions that peeled the skin. They had contraptions that pierced the skin. Agony. Withheld food. They had contraptions to break bone. They had contraptions to drown people with water. But they had these waterboarding type stuff. Agony. Underneath the floorboards of the church. All for the law, statutes, and commandments. Sacrifice. And if they were obstinate enough, if after all they had gone through, after all the maiming, the starvation, and all the torture that they've gone through, if they were still so obstinate that no matter what, that they weren't going to come off the law, statutes, and commandments, then they were then condemned to what was called an auto de fe. An auto de fe was a ceremony. It was called the act of faith. It occurred on Sunday. That was his day, the day of the Roman Catholic Church. And it usually occurred in one of two places. It occurred either at the city square or it occurred in church. And it was part of a sermon. There was a sermon given, and the climax of the service was the burning of the Israelites. Young, old, it didn't matter. They were burned at the stake. Now, on that day, the accused would be marched in. This would be some sort of area that was kind of set up like a stadium, because it had to be outside, right? Because if you're going to set somebody on fire, you can't do that inside, or it's going to get smoky. So this was outside, like a stadium seating. You had benches, you had seats. I kind of wonder if you had, concession stands going on. People said hot dog, cold beer. hot dog, cold beer. If it was today, it would be at a stadium. You go to a football game, and if this was an altar de fe, you would have in the middle, you would have these large stacks of wood, these large platforms of wood. And in these large platforms of wood, you would have this large pillar that would rise from the midst of it. And as these Israelite men and women, families, had been tortured, and a lot of them were maimed, a lot of them were emaciated, and they would bring them out, and then they would strap them, fasten them to the stake. All the while, you would have these I call them bishops, these bishops around them, these Catholic bishops around them, trying to, even to the last minute, trying to get them to profess, trying to get them to get away with those laws, statutes, commandments. Come on now. You don't want to be burned alive like this. You don't want to go like that. Come on now. And at this point, even though their fate was sealed, they were still offered some mercy. And this was the mercy that they gave them on that day. They said, you know what? You don't want to be burned alive. Instead, how about you just be choked? We can choke you out. You won't have to worry about burning, and it'll be, relatively quick, as opposed to smelling your own flesh cooked. And guess what, family? Many of them still remained obstinate. They still remain obstinate. So as they were strapped to the post, and what the bishops would do when the embers were to be lit, when the pillars of wood would be lit, there would be a bishop that would stand in front of them, and he would have this holy cross on a stick. And he would hold that holy cross in front of the face, this wooden cross in front of the face of those that were getting ready to be burned alive. And they did that so that the last thing that they would see would be the cross, the Holy Roman cross, before their lives were snuffed out. And so the embers were lit, the flames advanced, and they were consumed, and they burned. And so this is what happened to the mother and daughter on this faithful day. I'm sorry, this is what happened to the father and the mother on that faithful day. They were burned first. This was a burning of a family of three. Father and mother. And then there was a 13-year-old girl. So what they did was that they burned the father and mother first. So in the middle of them burning, in the middle of this great stadium where the crowd is yelling, where the bishops and these church leaders are playing to the crowd in the Sunday sermon, it says what they did was that they then turned to the child and they let her loose, because at this point in time she was tied up, she was bound. And then they approached her. Let me see if I have the original text on this one. No, I don't have it. But again, I do have the original text on this. This is from an old book. This is from an old book that was published before, right in the middle of the 1800s. So she's looking at her parents being burned, imagining the people that you love being burned alive before your very eyes. She probably has, you can probably imagine that she probably has tears just flowing down her face. The mother that coddled her when she was little, the mother that, gave her stories. There was a special bond between a daughter and a father. The father that probably read stories to her, the father that probably had her sitting in the lap or chased her around the kitchen table. They were burning before her eyes. And I'm sure those tears were welling up, and probably the tears were just flowing and flowing at this point in time, because you can probably imagine that this spectacle, this might be the first time that she's seen this spectacle, let alone this spectacle of being her very own family. So pretty much all that she had known growing up as an infant on up to that point of 13 years was gone. The house was gone. Her parents were gone. They were ablaze. And I'm sure her parents had screamed. They probably had heard the cries and screams of her parents. And it said that they let her loose from the bonds that were holding her. And these bishops had come close to her and got around to her, and that they were ministering to her about these laws, statutes, and commandments, the same ones that we are talking about in these videos, that in the Dr. Daff show and all these other shows. And they came close to her and they were telling her, it's like, you know, you don't have to go through this burning, young lady. You know, you just turn to the Pope. Let the Pope be your man. And you can be saved. He died for your sins. You don't have to do any of that anymore. You can eat pork. Actually, you know what, family? Let me see if I can find the original text. And I think I have it on another PowerPoint slide. Hang on, just give me a 1 minute, because I didn't realize I have it on the original text. I didn't realize I had taken that text out. So let me see if I can. I'm gonna stop sharing this real quick, because I don't want you to think that it's just my words. Of course, I'm modernizing it to a certain degree, just so that you can kind of put it into perspective of if it was present day, like if it was a stadium, like if you can imagine if you ever went to a football game, a baseball game. I guess this will be more like a baseball game where you have the open field, open air baseball game, and you would have those platforms, like I was saying, in the middle, and then that great sacrifice taking place. Let me see, what did I do with that? Hang on a second, fam. Let's do. I apologize, fam. I wanted to have this on here. I think it's on my other. It is on my laptop. Hang on. I really want to share this this testimony with you, because I know I can recount it, but if you can see it for yourself on the screen, I just think it'd be so much more powerful. So I'm going to bring it up on another computer in the background, and while I'm going to try to multitask while I guess I'll just tell it to you while I multitask here. So hang on. Let me do this. I'm gonna grab that. I gotta move some files over, then I gotta send it to myself. So yeah, okay. So while I'm doing this, I'm gonna be clicking in the background while I'm doing this. But in any case, like I said, these bishops, they had gotten around her and they were ministering to her, and they were trying to tell her that if you come off these laws, statutes, and commandments, that you don't have to go through what your parents went through. You know, you can be saved, so to speak. And it said that she had appeared to listen for a while. So you know how you was talking to children and they're kind of nodding their head. And they're like, okay, I hear what you're saying. And this is a 13-year-old girl after a while. I mean, after all, I mean, she should be frightened from fire. She should be frightened from seeing her parents being unalive before her very eyes. So if anybody can be converted, I mean, if anybody on that platform can be converted, it has to be the children, right? At least that's what we would have thought. But they said that she considered what they said, and then they said she then jumped into the flames. It said she sprung into the flames. Can you imagine the shock that was on their face? Their parents were being burned, and they had to be held in place by, not handcuffs or anything, but they had to be tied in place so that they wouldn't move. But here you had this child that was, by all account, were set free. She was set free. It said that her fetters were removed. She had already been set free, and they were talking to her face to face to tell her to get rid of the law, statutes, and commandments. And then by her own volition, by her own courage, she considered and weighed the choice on the scales. And evidently what she came to was that it is better to be unalived than to live in a world of lawlessness. This 13-year-old girl who was set free jumped into the flames of her parents and were unalived. This is what Israel was made of. This is why they had to take the children away from the parents. When she was unalive, as you can imagine, this caused such a stir in the crowd who, by all accounts, thought that they held a high moral ground. That after all, it was these people that were under bondage and they were just merely trying to set them free. And when they saw this child of 13 jump into the flame of her own free will and accord for the Most High's law, statutes, and commandments, they were shocked. And they said that when this occurred, that the altar of the faith, the burning of the Israelites in that town, was paused for 12 years. You heard me, family? 12 years. Just from the act of what that young lady had done, it shocked that entire town that they couldn't even bring themselves to do that again. Because you have to understand, it had to make them think, it had to make them go, well, wait a minute. Are we truly on the right side of the fence as far as this is concerned? This is why I talk about sacrifice. You don't realize the sacrifices that were made in order for you to get to this point that you are lawless. You are missing the history. You are missing the key part of history that is the result that results in you, not knowing, who you are, where you come from, because in order to do that, which is a very unique, it's a very unique scenario where you get a person that doesn't know their history, that they were literally separated from their history at some point in time. From a person that has their history, because remember, if the transatlantic slave trade was a bunch of elders, people in their 40s, mixed in with kids, then the history of who they were and where they came from would have never been lost. But the only way you get there is that you got a ship full of kids. Nobody there that has the history with them, and then once they get to their destination, they're taught that they're somebody else. They're given a history that they are somebody else. So to that end, and I'm still trying to pull up this thing on my other computer. But you know what, family, as I'm going through this, I'm just going to go ahead and share these last slides on my existing PowerPoint. Let me do this. Hang on, family. Just want to make sure I got the right one up. Make sure I don't have multiple, because I was pulling up multiple slides here in an attempt to get the right one. All right, so, but definitely let that sit with you for a while, fam. I know when I saw that, family, that one messed me up. I'm telling you, that one messed me up. I saw that one. I remember making a video about it. I tried to put music behind it just so that people could see it. But I knew at the end of the day that whatever I did was not going to bring it justice, because this girl, if she's representative of what Israel was and what Israel is, it is no matter. I mean, this explains why people are so afraid, why they were so afraid of us waking up and turning back to the law, statutes, and commandments. So, all right, well, I'm going to pull up my screen. Hopefully, let me see if I can pull it back up here. Let's do PowerPoint presentation, sacrifice. Nope, not that one. Presenter's view. Not that one. Here we go. All right. All right, let's wrap it up, fam. I know you've been on for over an hour. Thanks for hanging out with me, family. Peace and blessings. But again, just wanted to reiterate and show you the part of the discussion that is left out, and that is the part of history, the sacrifices that were made. And again, I know, shout out to brothers and sisters over at Boom, because having a conversation after giving a similar lesson, and the brother actually had a great question that was like, well, how do we know that these, when you talk about the Crusades, when you talk about Germany and stuff like that, like, how do you know that these people were black? Because of course you got people today claiming this history. This is the problem that we have today, is that we have a bunch of folks running around saying that we're Israel. And this is one of the things I know when I was doing the research that I ran into, and that is one of the first things I discovered was, well, when I look at the books, when I look at the old books say that the Israelites were black, new books say that they're white, and then we're trying to figure out, all right, so when did this switcheroo occur, and where did the switcheroo occur? And one of the first places that I saw the switcheroo occur is in this place called Cochin. Cochin is in India. And in India, there was an example of an old Israelite population in India, and they had been there for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years. But they had been in India, they lived in India, and they were called, they were black. They were very black, very dark-skinned Israelites. But then during that time, in recent history, during their recent history, these white Jews showed up. These Ashkenazi Jews showed up. And they showed up claiming to be the Israelites. And they were like, what? It's like, no, we Israelites, y'all fake. Like, this was in the 1800s, family. It's like, no, we the Israelites. It's like, who is you? You just got here. We've been here. And y'all light skinned. And so, of course, you had these white Israelites show up, and they tried to usurp the older black Israelite populations. Then they tried to tell the black population that they weren't the real ones, that they were the real ones. And then they also tried to take, like, the black Israelites had the Torah. They had ancient scrolls of Torah that went back hundreds of years as well. It was written on like lambskin or some sort of parchment. But then the white European Israelites, they didn't have old scrolls. All their scrolls were brand new, freshly written. So in Cochin, you had this dynamic where it was this beef between the white and the black, the old and the new. And it went on for many, many years. And it wasn't until there had to be an outside authority come into Cochin, look at both parties, do its own analysis, and determine that, you know what, man, these black folks been here. They the real people. Y'all brand new. Y'all are not the Israelites. And so they made a definitive ruling that the black Israelites, I'm saying black Israelites, but the dark-skinned melanated ones were in fact the real Israelites, and the other ones were the fake ones. But what that showed me, family, was that even during that time, you saw what they were trying to do. They were trying to take over the name, the lineage of the Israelites, and usurp them. So this occurred in Cochin. Also, we even see this over in the U.S. In the early history of the U.S., many of the Israelites that came over in the early infancy of the U.S., of the colonies, they were Israelites from Spain and Portugal. And they had been there for hundreds of years until, well, I'll just say many years until the 1800s. In the early 1800s, the immigration laws were changed. They were changed so that they restricted or reduced the immigration of other ethnicities into the country, but it increased the immigration of Germans. Remember, we said Germany was the hub, was the heartland of the Holy Roman Empire. It allowed those Israelites that were those Ashkenazi that came out of the Holy Roman Empire into the U.S. in the early 1800s. And when they came over in the early 1800s, this is when we start to see some changes take place in the U.S. One, the ancient dark-skinned melanated Israelites began to disappear. Part of that disappearance had to do with classifications because they were dark-skinned melanated people, their classifications were then just changed to none other than your friendly neighborhood Negro. They were just lumped into that designation of your friendly neighborhood Negro, and they went away. Their synagogues went away. The places where they gathered went away. And then the other thing that we saw was this great explosion of the population of the Ashkenazi Germans in the U.S. And the kicker was we also started seeing a change occur in books, as far as like the description of the Israelites in the mid 1800s onwards, then started slowly but surely changing from a dark-skinned melanated people to a white white people, white pale people. And this is why I tell people is that, like, when you're pushing this notion that the Israelites were white, that is a relatively recent, a recent thing, manifestation. It's not something that's old. It's relatively recent. From the middle of the 1800s forward, that's where that came from. It's called a remix of history. In any case, the question is, when I'm talking about the Crusades, knowing that there was a changing of the guard, there was a changing of the Israelites from being a black, dark-skinned, melanated people to a white people, and that today we have Caucasian, pale-skinned people claiming to be Israel, claiming to be the phenotype of Israel, even though you can look at things like the Lakesh relief, which clearly shows, Lakesh relief was created in like 701 BC or a little bit after that. And it clearly shows Israel as being an Afrocentric people, because they had short, cropped, nappy, woolly hair. They didn't have long, straight hair. That was not a thing in the Lakesh relief. So we have things like that. We even have the examination of the skulls from 701 BC, which also confirmed that the skulls were even skulls of black people. You can tell whether a person is a black person or Caucasian based off of the shape of the skull. And the skulls of the Israelites were skulls of black people. So we have all this evidence, this direct evidence showing that Israel was a certain people. And we know that the, folks like the Ashkenazi, during 701 BC, according to the archaeological sites, that they did not have woolly hair back then. Because one of the things is that they'll say things like, well, it's because they mixed and they changed over time. Nope. When we looked at the archaeological sites in 701 BC, your hair wasn't straight. When we look at your skulls weren't, didn't match the Israelites. So we know via scientific proof that they weren't Israelites. And also then another question that came up was DNA. Well, Brother Benai, what about DNA? Was there DNA from during that time? The thing is that there was DNA extracted from archaeological sites, but the thing is that they won't make it public. Not from the territory of Judea. Judea is the territory of the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. They will not release those DNA samples, not from back in the day during the time when Israel was in the land of Judea. So yes, DNA exists, but they won't release it. But praise be to the Most High, we at least have the skulls, and we at least have these things like the Lakesh relief that shows us what they look like. And so we have that for the Israelites over in the land. But what about the Israelites that were over in Germany? How do we know what they look like? Well, we also have a couple of things. One is that we have the skulls. We know that via the cranial analysis that the skulls of the people that were in Germany changed from a black, dark-skinned, melanated people to a Caucasian people. We know that change took place. That is something that's scientifically documented and accepted. And then the other thing that we also have in addition to that, is that we have family crest. So a family crest represents a representation of the family, a visual representation of the family, and that many of these family crests show black people. Specifically, like when you're looking at Germany, you have northern Germany, then you have southern Germany. Southern Germany was called Bavaria. It was called Bavaria, southern Germany. And most of the Israelite population was in the south, in Bavaria. It's always funny because Judea was in the south of the land of Israel. And then for whatever reason, even in Germany, our people were in South Germany. And didn't see the thank you for your super chats, family. Peace and blessings to Brother Lawrence Silver. Thank you for your super chat, my brother. Really appreciate it. Michael Dawson, 2397. Thank you for your super chat, my brother. Peace and blessings to you. Kali Smith, thank you for your super chat. Much appreciated. Thank you. YAH 7, thank you for your super chat. Shalom, my brother. My first Israelite teacher on YouTube. The Most High caught my attention. Praise be to the Most High. Thank you. Peace and blessings to you, and protected by Yah. Thank you for your super chat. Always thank you for your support, family. All your support is greatly appreciated, especially during a time of when the folks that want to pretend to be Israel, they go through this thing called doxing. You know, they always try to go after people's finances. They've done it with Candace Owens. They've done it with, a lot of the social media pundits. Believe it or not, family, they have come after our community with a vengeance. And the thing is that it's not as public as you know. They always do it behind the scenes. They even do it from outside of the U.S. It's from outside the country. The reason why they do that is because, of course, if we catch wind of who's doing this, of who's calling folks employers, of who's putting you on, these blacklists when it comes to employment. Of course, if we get a hold of that, we can take them to court in a heartbeat, and we can sue they sue the draws off of. But they are sneaky as little slithering snakes. So this is why they don't do it in public, or they do it from outside the country, because if they're outside the jurisdiction of this country, then we can't take them to court, and they know this. These are literally some people that were born in the U.S. and they've moved over to Israel, and they're living in Israel, having these attacks against our community. We know this for sure. I'm not just making this up, because if you go to their website, like what's it, stopantisemitism.com, I'm trying to think of the other one. There was some of these other websites. If you go to their websites, you not only see Caucasians on there, but you also see people from our community on their website and they're doxing them. So again, long story short, thank you for your support, because it helps us to remain independent, and it helps us to remain insulated against their attacks. So whether you're giving super chats or you're considering being a Patreon supporter, if you're a Patreon supporter, just $5 a month, the cost of a cup of coffee, or less than the cost of a cup of coffee one time a month. You're basically buying us a cup of coffee one time a month. And that also helps to support, and also in order to thank those who support via Patreon, putting on some specific Patreon content, which one is that Moedim project that should be rolling out here pretty soon. And then the other should be some specific content, like there is a video that's coming out that is called, it's going to be available on YouTube later, but it's going to be available on Patreon first. I don't have it in front of me. But in any case, just want to, and that's my way of saying thank you to Patreon supporters as well. All right. So all that being said, let's get back to it, family. Let's go ahead and wrap up, get you out of here on this. And that is just the proof of showing who the Israelites were over in Germany, because we've been taught for a long time that the Israelites were, when you think about Germany and Holland and places like that, that they were light-skinned, pale-skinned people, even though when you run your DNA and you upload your DNA to mytrueancestry.com, and mytrueancestry.com, like I said before, will allow you to test or compare your DNA to DNA that's pulled from these archaeological sites. So there are archaeological sites in Germany, there are archaeological sites in Holland. And what people are figuring out is that when they run their DNA through My True Ancestry, they're getting a bunch of hits over in Holland. They're getting a bunch of hits or matches over in Germany, in southern Germany, in Bavaria, and in certain sites in certain cities in the north, because there were some cities in the north where the Israelites were as well. But this all lines up with what I'm reading right now. And even the family crest also testifies that the Israelites were black in those places as well. And you can see that on the screen. It says, what this 1340 document proves is this is an opening royal section of the oldest surviving heraldic roll of the Holy Roman Empire. So remember, I told you the Holy Roman Empire was over there in that area of Rome and France and things like that. And so just like over in Spain and Portugal, how the Israelites were under the rulership of the Catholic kings and king and queen, they were also under the rulership of the Holy Roman Empire, and they were unalived in mass in great numbers when the Pope authorized the Crusades. And that's when that they swept through the country with massacres and just unalived a lot of our people. And this is what changed the demographics in that area, so that even to this day, when you look, you'll see like, well, where are all the black folks at? You can thank the Crusades for that. But here we are, just looking at some of these. I just wanted to pull some of the some of these family crests. You can see the next king. It says kingdom says it is a full body, dark skinned figure. It says the empire that persecuted the Israelites recorded their kings, emperors, and God figures as black people in its own official state documents. Oops, let me get over here. And you also may have heard of Prester John. And so this is one of those things where if you look at the older pictures of Prester John, he is a dark-skinned melanated person, along with the kings that report up to him. What I highlighted over here is these are kings that report up to Prester John. Like this is Prester John in the seat. These are kings that report up to him. And you can see that they are described as a dark-skinned melanated people. It says what the shows is 9 years before the Alhambra decree. So 9 years before the Alhambra decree, this is the most comprehensive heraldic work of the 15th century. It was created inside the Holy Roman Empire by a German knight. And it says Prester John depicted as a dark-skinned black man on the ornate throne. Now, keep in mind, this was done with the assistance of AI to look at the pictures, and using AI, we were able to get a more in-depth analysis than what was made when I first came across this many years ago. So AI went way beyond that. And it says his vassal kings, all dark skinned, the kings surrounded his throne are all rendered with dark brown complexions, wearing crowns, holding scepters. And it says the emperor of Egypt's coat of arms, 3 black heads as a central heraldic charge, has heraldic identity. In other words, when you come to some of these family crests, you're going to see a repeated pattern. And the repeated pattern is 3 black faces on the family crest. That is a pattern. There's a pattern that's repeated. 3 black faces on a family crest. In addition to those, you can see it says black figures in German family crests. German noble families. These aren't just regular families. These are German noble families. Throughout the Holy Roman Empire, carried dark-skinned black figures as their heraldic identity for centuries. Von whatever. I'm not even going to try to pronounce some of these names, but you get it. Crown blackhead, crest of a German tournament knight. It says blackhead with white flowers, clearly African features. And these are the different places that these family crests represent. Full black body figure with white mitre hat rising from the helmet. You can see all that. And again, these are where it's geographically spread out. So all throughout Germany, we have these family crests representing these different figures. And this is where I was telling you about before, 3 black faces. Now, this little, I call it the dirty bird. This dirty bird is a bird that represents the Holy Roman Empire, right? And so even in the Holy Roman Empire, you have these black faces. So that's another reality too, families, that, there were a lot of black folks in the Holy Roman Empire, just like in Spain and Portugal. You had some Israelites literally working with the king and queen of Spain. You literally had Israelites working with the Holy Roman Empire. Same deal, right? Same deal until they turned against them. That's the thing too, family, like those that were over in Spain and Portugal that decided to adopt the Roman Catholicism, and they were referred to as new Christians. It worked out for a while, and then the Inquisition came, and they were persecuted and prosecuted. So, same thing here, same thing over in Spain and Portugal, same thing over in Germany and Holland. Same pattern, family. Even when they capitulated, they were still hunted down, and we know at the end of the day that's because of that was because of the curses. All right. Part 5 says the final tactic, the ships. The transatlantic slave trade was not merely commerce, it was the final forced conversion, moving the Israelite remnant from their land, their family, their language, and their laws, and raising their children in lawlessness. Deuteronomy 28:68, and Yah shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships, and there you shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen. So the ships of Deuteronomy 28:68, the final forced conversion. That's what it was, a forced conversion, the prophecy. And it says, and we've just read Deuteronomy 28:68. 1, they were removed from their land. The expulsion massacre the slave raids removed the Israelites and remnants from the territory of Africa, Iberia, and the Middle East, breaking every connection to the ancestral land. 2, stripped language and name. African Iberian names were erased, Hebrew language forbidden, the ancestral tongue destroyed across one generation of captivity. 3, forbid the laws of YAH. What the Crusades and the Inquisition could not accomplish by sword and fire, the slave plantation accomplished by law. Teaching the Torah or teaching the law was forbidden. The laws of YAH were outlawed. Remember, the slaves were given a special Bible. It was called the Slave Bible, with the passages of Israel removed. The redemption of Israel was removed. The law, statutes, and commandments, though all of the 10 commandments, think about it, family. The 10 commandments were removed out of the Bible. How can you have the Bible without the 10 commandments? Well, that's easy. If you're going to have a Bible and give it to the slaves, well, you got to take those 10 commandments out. And I can't really blame them, because if you look at the major slave revolts in the country, you know, the one thing that they have in common, whether you talk about Nat Turner or Denmark Vesey, is that in each of those cases, there was a revelation, a revealing that they were the children of Israel. Nat Turner believed that they were the children of Israel. Denmark Vesey taught that they were the children of Israel. And when they got a hold of that, there was a rebellion that was stirred in their souls. And then they rose up against their Christian masters. So you know what they did? It was like, oh, you know what? We're going to have to take this truth about them being redeemed out of this Bible, out of this book. And that's what they did. So they were raised in lawlessness, the doctrine of the slave master. The doctrine of lawlessness is the doctrine of the slave master. What parents in Portugal in 1497 died to prevent. Rome raising their children in lawlessness, the slave trade accomplished across an entire continent. The master's Bible without the law. A version of the scripture was taught to emphasize submission. Slaves, forgive your masters, or submit to your masters. It says forgiveness of the slave master and salvation by faith alone, carefully removing the laws and dietary commands, the Sabbath and the feast days of YAH. A Sunday instead of Sabbath. The seventh day, Sabbath. It says the sign of the covenant between YAH and Israel was replaced with the first day. The laws their forefathers died for were declared obsolete. Now we know this happened. We know, we heard about Emperor Constantine, who solidified it, via his laws and stuff like that. So we know that it was literally Rome that codified this. And it says new names, new identities. It says African Hebrew names replaced by European names. Family lineages were erased. The memory of who they were, the covenant people who kept the commandments, buried under centuries of captivity. And one of the things I talked about real quick was that the thing about this, the Israelites of Spain and Portugal, they were the first to have Israelite last names. The usage of Israelite surnames was a new thing with Spain and Portugal. They were the ones that brought that up, not the Ashkenazis. Ashkenazis didn't start using that in great numbers until the 1800s. The Israelites of Spain and Portugal, like if you see it in text before the 1800s, it was usually the Israelites of Spain and Portugal. So to that end, when slavery kicks off in the Americas, it was against the law for slaves to have last names. It was banned. So think about it. Why would it be against the law for slaves to have last names unless they had last names? Come on, fam. And then last but not least, it says the children taught to echo the master. It says generations raised to repeat the theology of their captors. The sacrifice of their forefathers forgotten. What parents died to protect was now worshipped in the form of their oppressors gave. And now we have the awakening. And so this is why the awakening is such a dangerous thing for the captors. This is why they're panicking. Because in the awakening, part of the awakening is not just awakening to we being Israel. I mean, that's fine. I mean, what's the harm in you reading some books and finding out that you literally have land and territory in Jerusalem, that you literally have land and territory over in the land of Israel, that you are literally the ones that had the blood sprinkled upon you at the foot of a burning mountain of Mount Sinai, and that your forefathers were saying, all that you say we will do. Therefore, binding you, sealing you until the bond of the covenant. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, no matter what you say, no matter what you believe, you are bound. Case closed. That is it. It's whether you believe you're an Israelite, whether you believe that you're an Ashkenazi, whether you believe that you're a Christian, you are bound by the bond of the covenant. There's no escaping this blood. None. And that's why it's better for you to know and then to order your steps accordingly than you to not know and just make statements and repeat the cycle which got you into the same predicament in the first place. This is what kind of causes me to see what, like, when symbolically pull my hair out, is because you hear these arguments about, oh, you guys are in bondage, you got to get rid of the law, statutes, and commandments. Do you not realize the whole reason why you're in this country today is because of them law, statutes, and commandments? Because they were doing exactly what you were talking about, and they got caught up. We got caught up and placed in here. But anyway, family, says the awakening says the remnant is remembering who they are and what their forefathers sacrificed. The remnant is remembering who they are and what their forefathers sacrificed. There was a sacrifice for this lawlessness. After centuries of captivity, the laws forgotten, the names erased, the sacrifice buried, the descendants of those who burned rather than convert are waking up. You are those descendants, family. You are the descendants of those who burned rather than converted. It's just that they stole you away from your parents. And it says, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. It says the return, remembering the sacrifice. Many are now turning back to the laws, statutes, and commandments of YAH and remembering the sacrifice of those who came before. Remember 1667, Hannah's son. Remember the lady whose 7 sons, all they had to do was eat a little bit of pork and they would have been saved. But all 7 sons and the mother herself was put to death because they wouldn't eat a mouthful of pork. The Rhineland, the Crusades, the thousands, the hundreds of thousands of Israelites that were unalive, that were given this ultimatum of convert or death, that they chose death rather than convert to being lawless. The Iberian martyrs, they were also given the same ultimatum: convert or be expelled, lose everything, lose your house, lose your home, lose all your wealth and riches and your children. It was done on Passover, and it was also done on many times. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't just done or performed on one day. These things occurred over multiple times over many, many years. But they chose to lose it all rather than to be lawless. Sacrifice. 1492, enslavement, taken on slave ships. It says scripture foretold, language stripped, laws forbidden, faith buried in captivity. And then today we have the awakening. Descendants returning to the laws of YAH, remembering the sacrifice, reclaiming the covenant of identity. This is the full breadth of our history, family. This is the full breadth of the discussion of the laws are being done away with. It is not just a metaphorical discussion that is limited to the bounds in the pages of the book of the Bible. It also includes captivity. It also includes all this stuff that I've set before you. All this history that is set before you is what's also included in this discussion of lawlessness. It says at the very bottom, it says the sacrifice was not in vain. The laws were not abolished. The covenant was not canceled. The remnant remembers. Hallelujah. It says they left their houses. They left their land. They could not take their gold. They watched their children taken. They were not, it says they were put on ships. They were sold. Their children's children were taught to worship as their slave masters. But the law was never canceled. The covenant was never broken. The sacrifice was not in vain. Matthew 24:13, but he who endures to the end, the same shall be saved. Hallelujah. All right, family. Well, hey, thank you for hanging in there, family. Thank you for tuning in. Pray that this message helped you out as far as your discussion, your understanding of the law, statutes, and commandments, and the sacrifices that were made in order for you to be lawless. There was a sacrifice made. There were things that were done. They know what they did, but they won't tell you. They're leaving it out of the discussion, which is part of the discussion of lawlessness. All right. Well, hey, love you, family. Won't keep you any longer. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Apologize. I was like trying to pull up that reference in the background. I just gave up on it. So I'll probably just drop it in. I may just drop it as a post or something like that, a community post. But I just wanted you to see with your own eyes. Like, this isn't, I mean, it's, of course, it's going to say it in a different way. I've wanted to put it in a way that you could understand it, kind of relate to it. But at the very end of the day, it's like that 13-year-old girl, man, we were built different, family. We were built different. Like, shout out to the Chiefs at Rebirth. Because I remember Chief said, we're domesticated. Like, we are literally domesticated people. And so we have to become undomesticated and kind of relearn some things. So anyway, but love you, family. Peace, love, and blessings. Y'all enjoy the rest of your evening, and shalom.
Yeah. The kingdom suffers violence, but rumble, rumble, rumble. Lion of Judah screaming outside the jungle, came as a lamb, but the second time rumble, rumble. The kingdom suffers violence, but rumble, rumble, rumble. Lion of Judah screaming outside the jungle, came as a lamb, but the second time rumble, rumble.
Sometimes I feel like Garvey, Selassie with an army. Judas Maccabees in the temple, come follow me. Getting in the handful, eating naked, still look. Angels of both sides, no reason for us to be shook. Some of us used to be crooks with multiple books where there's reading the charted. So when you go look, we some fighters, here's a warning when you see lighters. That's the fire in our bones coming straight from the throne.
The kingdom suffers violence, but rumble, rumble, rumble. Lion of Judah screaming outside the jungle, came as a lamb, but the second time rumble, rumble. The kingdom suffers violence, but rumble, rumble, rumble. Lion of Judah screaming outside the jungle, came as a lamb, but the second time rumble, rumble.
Posted on the white horse, no conversation, discourse. Revelation 20 laid down, don't take it by force. Don't believe anything without a reliable source. Free will, that's what I call a real pro-choice. Navigating life, I'ma die if I gotta fight. The kingdom suffer violence, especially when it's at night. You a coward, sucking punching, we gon' get you right. Shooting heat like Miami on a summer night.
The kingdom suffers violence, but rumble, rumble, rumble.